In every marriage, there are lines you draw to keep the peace. For 8 years, mine were drawn in chalk, faint blurred and easily smudged, designed more for the suggestion of a boundary than for any actual defense. I had built a life on the quiet, draining art of not noticing the growing glacial distance in my husband's eyes, not noticing the hollow, tinny echo in my own laughter, and most of all, not noticing that the lines I'd so carefully drawn around my own heart had long ago become the bars of a cage. I just never expected my husband's son to be the one to bring the rain that would wash them all away. My name is Maya, and I am 38. It's an age where you've lived just long enough to see the unforeseen consequences of your youthful choices play out in agonizing slow motion. My choice, made with all the bright, naive optimism of my late 20s, had been Greg. On paper, he was a masterpiece of masculine stability, a brilliant and successful software architect who was financially secure, and a man whose moods were as predictable as the placid gray tides on the lake our house overlooked. We lived in Washington State in a custom-built home of cedar and glass that was meant to be our sanctuary. But a sanctuary can begin to feel like a beautifully appointed prison when you are its only long-term solitary inmate. Greg saw me as the curator of that prison, the competent, efficient manager of our serene, orderly life. He would praise my taste in decor, the quiet efficiency with which I ran our household, the effortless grace with which I hosted his colleagues for dinner parties. He saw the functions I performed, the roles I played, but he had long ago stopped seeing the woman who was performing them. The quiet, persistent ache of being unseen had become the ambient noise of my existence. It was the low, steady hum of the refrigerator in the dead of night, the mournful, lonely call of a loon across the water, the almost imperceptible space between my own breaths. I had convinced myself that this was the price of admission for a comfortable, secure life. I had told myself over and over that it was enough. The lie was comfortable, worn in like an old soft sweater. It kept me warm enough not to freeze, until Leo came home. Leo was Greg's son, a product of a first marriage that had disintegrated long before I was ever in the picture. When I had married Greg, Leo was a gangly, quiet 15-year-old, a boy who seemed to want to fold himself into corners to take up as little space as possible in his father's new life. Our relationship over the years had been one of polite, careful distance, a shared orbit around the gravitational pull of Greg. Now, at 23, he had returned home after graduating from college, a temporary pause, a final summer of grace before he was set to start a demanding job in San Francisco in the fall. He arrived in late June, and the change in him was immediate, profound, and deeply unsettling. The boy who had perpetually avoided eye contact was gone. In his place was a man who moved with a quiet, deliberate confidence that was both foreign and strangely familiar. He was tall, with the broad, powerful shoulders of a collegiate swimmer, and his dark hair was perpetually damp from his morning swims in the lake. But it was his eyes that were different. They were his father's in color, a deep slate gray, but they held a quality that Greg's had long since lost, a focused, unnerving, and deeply penetrating attentiveness. When Leo looked at you, you felt it. You felt truly, completely seen. It began subtly, a series of small, almost imperceptible tremors before the earthquake. I was in the kitchen one morning, the air thick with the rich, dark smell of freshly brewed coffee and the damp, earthy scent of the surrounding forest after an early morning rain. I was wearing an old soft tank top and a pair of comfortable shorts, my usual uniform for the quiet mornings I believed were mine alone. I hadn't thought about the way the worn, thin cotton clung to my skin, or the way the morning light filtered through the large picture window, illuminating me from behind. Leo came into the kitchen, his bare feet silent on the cool slate floor. He was looking for the toolbox. He said something about a loose board on the dock that he wanted to fix. I pointed him toward the utility closet, and he leaned against the counter talking about his plans for the day. The conversation was mundane, the unpredictable weather, the surprising warmth of the lake for this time of year, his father's latest obsession with a vintage sailboat he was thinking of buying. But then the atmosphere in the room shifted. The air grew heavy, charged, the silence between our words suddenly full of unspoken dangerous things. I risked a fleeting glance at the dark, reflective surface of the oven door. I could see his image behind me, a static, dark silhouette against the brilliant, vibrant green of the trees outside. His gaze wasn't on my face. It was lower, slowly, deliberately tracing the curve of my back, the line of my hips. It wasn't a leer. It was something quieter, more intense. It was a look of pure, unadulterated, and almost clinical focus. A hot, prickling flush crept up the back of my neck. My heart, a lazy, contented muscle just moments before, began to beat a frantic, unfamiliar rhythm against my ribs. It was a dizzying cocktail of feelings I hadn't tasted in years, a sharp, potent shot of fear, a bitter twist of alarm, and a slow, spreading warmth of something perilously, thrillingly close to pleasure. I should have moved. I should have crossed my arms over my chest, turned around, made a joke to shatter the unbearable tension. But I didn't. I remained perfectly still, my hand gripping a ceramic mug on the counter, my knuckles turning white. I let the moment stretch, held captive by the sheer shocking force of being truly, completely seen. A wrench slipped from his hand, clattering against the slate floor with a sound that seemed deafening in the profound stillness of the room. We both flinched as if from a sudden sharp pain. "Sorry," he stammered, his cheeks turning a dark mottled red as he quickly bent to retrieve it. "Slipped. It's fine," I said, my voice a marvel of composure, betraying none of the exhilarating chaos that was erupting inside me. He mumbled something about needing a different tool and retreated from the kitchen, his footsteps hasty on the floor. I was left alone in the sunlit room, my pulse thundering in my ears. The feeling was terrifying, yes, but it was also electric. His gaze had been a jolt of lightning to a system I thought had been permanently powered down. It was the first time in a decade that I had felt something other than a placid, manageable contentment. I felt alive. And God help me, I wanted to feel it again. That evening, I dressed for dinner with more care than I had in years. I chose a simple, deep blue dress that clung to my body and deepened the color of my eyes, a dress that Greg had never once commented on. Across the dinner table, Leo was quiet, his eyes mostly on his plate. But I felt his awareness of me in every small gesture, in every beat of silence. When our hands brushed as he passed me the salad bowl, the contact was like a low-voltage current. His eyes flicked up to meet mine for a fraction of a second, and in that fleeting charged glance, an entire forbidden conversation passed between us. The days that followed were a master class in denial. I told myself it was nothing a fluke, a young man's momentary lapse in judgment. But the truth was, a dangerous seed had been planted, and I was the one watering it with every stolen glance, every carefully engineered moment of proximity. Greg, blissfully unaware, was consumed by a new project at work. He was often working late or disappearing into his home office for hours on end, leaving Leo and me to orbit each other in the quiet, spacious house. One afternoon, the sun finally broke through the persistent northwest clouds, its light shimmering on the surface of the lake, like a blanket of scattered diamonds. On a sudden impulse, I suggested a swim, my voice a perfect model of casual indifference. Leo agreed, and the quiet, dangerous thrill that shot through me was sharp and undeniable. I went upstairs to change, choosing my swimsuit with the deliberate strategic care of a general planning a military campaign. I settled on a classic, elegant black one-piece that was modest from the front, but was cut daringly low in the back. I told myself it was for me to make me feel confident in my own skin. It was a lie, and I knew it. When I walked down to the dock, he was already in the water, treading lazily, his wet dark hair slicked back from his forehead. His eyes tracked my every movement as I descended the wooden steps. I dove in the cold, bracing shock of the water, a welcome sensation, a momentary baptism from the insistent heat that was coiling deep in my stomach. We swam for a while, not speaking much, our movements creating silent concentric ripples that overlapped and merged in the still green water. "You're a strong swimmer," he said later as we rested at the end of the dock, our arms draped over the warm, sun-baked wood. "I grew up on a lake," I said, my voice soft. "A much smaller one than this. It's the one thing that really feels like home to me here." The admission slipped out before I could stop it. He turned his head to look at me, his expression serious. "Why only the one thing?" I shrugged, feigning a nonchalance I did not feel. "Oh, it's just a figure of speech." "Is it?" He pressed his gaze unwavering, refusing to let me hide. I looked away out across the vast, indifferent expanse of water. "This is a beautiful house," I said, deliberately changing the subject. "But it's Greg's house. I'm just living in it." He was silent for a moment. "I think I know what you mean," he said softly. Later, as I was climbing the ladder to get out of the water, my foot slipped on a wet rung. I lost my balance, a small cry of alarm escaping my lips as I flailed backward into the water. In an instant, Leo was there, a strong arm wrapping around my waist, his other hand gripping my arm, steadying me. His body was pressed against mine, hard and warm, and very real. For a long, breathless moment, we were frozen like that, water dripping from our bodies, the clean, fresh scent of the lake, and his skin filling my senses. His heart was hammering against his chest, or maybe it was mine. I couldn't tell. His eyes, just inches from my own, were dark, with an intensity that made my knees weak. He held me for a second longer than was strictly necessary before letting go, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He turned away and dove back into the water with a clean, sharp splash, as if he were trying to extinguish a fire. I stood on the dock, trembling, my hand pressed to my chest, the imprint of his body still warm against mine. The line I had drawn in chalk had been definitively washed away. We were standing in uncharted, dangerous territory, and we both knew it. The breaking point came on a Thursday. A persistent, moody drizzle had been falling all day, shrouding the lake and the surrounding forest in a thick gray mist. The house felt even more isolated than usual, a ship adrift in a sea of fog. Greg had flown to a conference in San Francisco that morning, and he wouldn't be back until the weekend. The thought of 2 full days, 2 long nights alone in the house with Leo was a terrifying, exhilarating prospect that had my nerves stretched taut. That evening, the quiet in the house was profound, heavy. We ate dinner in near total silence, the only sounds the soft clink of silverware against porcelain and the gentle, hypnotic patter of the rain against the large glass windows. Afterward, I curled up on the long sofa with a book, but I couldn't read. The words blurred on the page. My senses were tuned entirely to him, to his presence in the house. I could hear him upstairs, the faint muffled sound of music coming from his room, the occasional creak of floorboards as he moved about. Later, he came downstairs. He had showered. His hair was damp, and he was wearing a soft gray t-shirt and a pair of comfortable sweatpants. He didn't speak at first. He just stood in the wide archway of the living room watching me. "Can I join you?" He finally asked, his voice low and quiet. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He sat on the other end of the long sofa, leaving a respectable, carefully measured distance between us. But the space felt charged alive with a tension that was almost a physical presence. The rain whispered its secrets against the windows. "Are you happy, Maya?" he asked, his voice cutting cleanly through the quiet. The question was so direct, so baldly honest, it winded me. I stared into the cold, dark fireplace, the truth a heavy, undigested lump in my throat. "I have a good life," I said, the well-worn, evasive answer falling from my lips out of habit. "That's not what I asked." I finally turned to look at him. His face was serious, his gray eyes searching mine. "No." I whispered the single word, a profound betrayal of everything I had so carefully built. "No, I'm not." "Why not?" Because I feel like a ghost in my own life," I said, the words tumbling out now that the dam had finally catastrophically broken. "I do all the right things, I play the part, but the person I was, she's gone. I don't think Greg even remembers she ever existed. He sees a capable partner, he sees a household manager, he doesn't see me." Leo leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. "I see you," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I see the way you look out at the lake when you think no one is watching, like you're trying to memorize it. I see the way you bite your bottom lip when you're reading a book that's really gotten to you. I see how you arrange the flowers from the garden not just to fill a vase, but to create something beautiful in a quiet house. I see the sadness in your eyes even when you're smiling." My breath hitched. No one had ever articulated my existence with such devastating, beautiful accuracy. He saw the small secret parts of me I thought were completely invisible. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and shameful. "Leo." I whispered his name, a desperate plea. "Don't. I've tried not to," he said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming thick with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. "I've spent weeks telling myself that I'm wrong, that I have no right. You're my father's wife. But it doesn't change what I see, and it doesn't change what I feel." He closed the distance between us, then moving across the sofa with a fluid, deliberate grace. He stopped just before me, his knee almost touching mine. He didn't reach for me. He just waited, giving me the space to retreat, to run. But I couldn't have moved if the house were on fire. I was paralyzed, mesmerized by the raw, unguarded emotion in his handsome face. "I don't want to just be with you," he said, his voice cracking slightly with the force of his confession. "I want to know you. The person who loves the lake and bites her lip and arranges flowers. That's the person I can't stop thinking about." He lifted a hand and gently, tentatively tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers were warm against my skin, and the simple, tender gesture shattered the last of my crumbling resolve. I leaned into his touch, a silent, complete surrender. When his lips met mine, it was not a frantic, greedy kiss. It was slow, deliberate, a question and an answer all in one. It was a kiss full of a longing so profound it felt like a kind of homecoming. My hands came up to frame his face, my fingers tangling in his damp, soft hair. His own hands went to my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us, only the frantic, synchronized beating of our hearts. He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against mine, his breath warm on my face. His eyes were dark, searching mine. What happened next was not a decision, but an inevitability. It was the natural, unstoppable conclusion to a story that had begun weeks ago with a single lingering look in a sunlit kitchen. He led me by the hand up the stairs, our footsteps echoing in the large, silent house. We didn't speak. There was no need for words. In the soft, dim light of my bedroom, with the rain still whispering its secrets against the window pane, we crossed the final line. It was a shedding of skins, a dismantling of the carefully constructed lies we had both been living. It was not just an act of passion, but an act of profound, terrifying recognition. To be known that completely to be seen down to the very soul, it was the most intimate experience of my life. Afterward, lying in the dark, tangled in the sheets of the bed I had shared with my husband for 8 years, I felt his hand stroking my hair, his lips pressing a soft, gentle kiss to my shoulder. For the first time in a very, very long time, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt real, and I was terrified. The affair was a fever that consumed the rest of the summer. Every moment Greg was away on business or lost in the digital world of his work was ours. We were reckless, stealing touches in the kitchen, long, deep embraces in the laundry room, silent moments on the dock late at night under a canopy of stars. The house once, my beautiful, lonely prison, became our sanctuary. Leo filled the empty spaces not just with his physical presence, but with his unwavering attention. He would ask me about my day and actually listen to the answer, his eyes fixed on mine. He noticed when I was tired and would insist on making me dinner. He held me at night not with the absent-mindedness of long habit, but with a focused, reverent tenderness that made me ache with a pleasure that was almost painful. He was falling in love with me. And the terrifying, undeniable truth was, I was falling in love with him too. It wasn't the comfortable, predictable affection I had for Greg. It was a wild, dangerous, all-consuming thing that threatened to burn my carefully ordered world to the ground. The guilt was a constant bitter taste in the back of my throat. I couldn't look Greg in the eye without feeling like a fraud, a liar, a stranger in my own life. He noticed my distraction, of course, but he attributed it to stress, to the summer heat, to anything but the truth that was living and breathing under his own roof. His obliviousness was no longer a quiet, persistent ache. It had become a sharp, stabbing pain. I began to hate him for not seeing, because his blindness was a damning reflection of my own deceit. As August drew to a close, a sense of deep, gnawing dread began to settle over me. Leo's departure for San Francisco loomed a hard deadline on our stolen, impossible dream. "I don't want to go," he told me one night as we lay in bed, the moonlight striping the floor in bars of silver and black. "You have to," I said, my voice hollow, a stranger's voice. "It's your future." "You're my future," he whispered, his grip on me tightening. "Stay with me, Maya. Leave him. We can be real. We don't have to hide anymore." His words were a beautiful, dangerous fantasy, one I had allowed myself to indulge in during the darkest, loneliest hours of the night. But in the stark light of day, they were terrifying. To burn down my life, my home, my financial security, my reputation, all for a 23-year-old man, my stepson. It was madness. But was it more mad than continuing to live a lie, to slowly suffocate in this gilded cage? He left on a gray, drizzly morning at the end of the month. We didn't have a proper goodbye, just a quick, desperate hug in the hallway, while Greg was on a work call in his office, his voice a muffled, distant drone. "I love you," Leo whispered in my ear, his voice thick with emotion. "The choice is yours. I'll wait." I watched from the upstairs window as his old silver Honda disappeared down the long, winding drive, my hand pressed against the cold glass. The house was instantly, crushingly silent. The vibrant, intoxicating color he had brought into my life seemed to drain away, leaving behind a world of muted, desolate gray. That evening, Greg came into the living room where I was sitting staring out at the lake. He smiled a placid, contented smile. "It's good to have the house back to ourselves, isn't it?" he said. "It's so quiet now." He sat beside me on the sofa, placing a dry, passionless kiss on my cheek. And in that moment I knew the choice wasn't about Greg or Leo, it was about me. The silence that Greg found so peaceful, I now found utterly unbearable. It was the sound of my own slow death. Leo hadn't saved me. He had simply held up a mirror, and I could no longer ignore the ghost that was staring back at me. I don't know what I will do. I don't know if I have the courage to light the match that will burn my life to the ground. But I know with a certainty that is as terrifying as it is liberating that I cannot stay in this quiet, beautiful house. The rain had come and washed away all the lines, and I was left standing in the ruins, finally terribly free. This story is a reminder that the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. If you have ever felt trapped by the choices you've made, or if you've ever had a connection that forced you to see your own truth, please share your experience in the comments. For more stories that explore the complicated, messy, and beautiful landscape of the human heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your voice is welcome here. Thank you for listening.